mentoring neurodiverse individuals and teams. Friends, I have a great guest for us today, so I suggest you get your coffee or your tea and sit down because this show is bound to inspire you. I'm already getting goosebumps. I have Dr. Joe Abisambra with me, and I've known Joe for, I don't know, 20 years or something, a long time. We met each other actually racing sailboats years ago. And we've been in each other's lives on all different kinds of levels for a long time. But the thing I most respect currently about him is his ability to mentor people who are very different in the way they process and think. Now, he is the director or the associate director of one of the brain institutes at the University of Florida. I'll let him tell you that because that's just way too long. But what I do know is he has a research lab and he does neuroscience research, and he pays very close attention to how these things work. And he has neurodiverse gifted children and a neurodiverse gifted wife. So he has expertise in mentoring and guiding that's far beyond just work. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dianne. This is I didn't know who you were talking about when you're introducing me. That is such a kind and humbling introduction. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm an associate professor at the University of Florida in the Department of Neuroscience, where my lab does research primarily on Alzheimer's disease and related disorders. And we're very interested in Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia, and the long-term consequences of traumatic brain injury. What we really want to know is, how does it happen? What is that one thing, the one main thing, or that one thing that's really important that we can then identify that causes disease and then target to stop the disease? That's what we do in the lab.
Yeah, and I've had the honor of spending lots of hours with Joe and his lab in different retreats and different events. They are the coolest people ever. Like, I always tell them at the end, I just want to move on there with you and do work with you guys because they are so fun. But the thing I love about them is their dedication to their work and their intelligence and the way they engage. Like, there's so many levels. So neurodiversity, I want to kind of back up a minute and talk about neurodiversity from my perspective, because a lot of people hear that word and they think autism. I hear that word and I hear the fact that all of us are different. So we're neurodiverse on a very core level. But what I'm really looking for is the atypical patterns of thinking, or the people who are the outliers, the people who think outside of the box. They might be gifted, they might have ADHD, they might have something like autism, but there's all kinds of ways that we find neurodiversity in the population of people who are gifted or twice exceptional. So I'm really thinking about it in a little bit broader sense than the word is used in the typical way. And I also wanted to define mentoring here, because Joe is a mentor, different than a coach. And coaches help you get to your one single goal, and that's great. We need them. But a mentor to me has much deeper meaning, which is why I also call myself a mentor. A mentor is somebody who's experienced, has a knowledge base and understanding, and is willing to get into someone else's life and the nitty-gritty of it and help them transcend whatever's holding them back from a more holistic perspective. And so a mentor is that experienced person who brings a sense of authority in the sense of experience to the table. And Joe does that really well. So I have the first question, and then we're going to go from there. Okay.
Right.
When you think about all the people that you've mentored or currently are mentoring, whether it's students, people in your lab, other people, random people that come to you for advice at conferences and things, what do you see as a common thread of things they are seeking from you? Like, why would they approach you and say, Joe, help me? What do you think that common thread might be?
It's interesting. Why do they come to me? Actually, I never thought about that. And it's funny because in some cases, they come for different reasons, but the underlying thread is probably people who are very passionate and ambitious. They have this inherent drive to understand neuroscience, with a particular emphasis on neurodegeneration in Alzheimer's, for example. So they come to me because they're They're interested in moving forward with a deep passion and understanding how the disease works. And they're coming from a point of I can tell there's just passion, but they come from different reasons, right? So some folks have come to me because they say that I look like them in terms of being from an underrepresented background. I'm originally from Colombia, and I'm Hispanic, and so they said they feel more comfortable with me in the lab. So they have that, and they have other elements. So I guess there is a common thread, but it comes in so many different flavors of an interest that uh, leads to a successful mentorship relationship.
And so you brought up one of the things I was thinking about earlier today is that there's that thread of that passion and that dedication and that drive. And it's reflected in you and how you present yourself. So that to me makes total sense.
Okay.
And also there's all the nuance and difference and variance, and everybody thinks differently and process differently and all these different things. So
Yes.
when you're all together, like when you're having your lab meetings or your staff meetings, or you're with your students, and you're in a group, how do you do that? How do you manage all the different things? Like, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And, because there's a lot of leaders who are listening to the show and they're like, how do I manage all these people? They're all so different and they do things that are kind of like, I don't understand. So, what are some things that you do? And maybe it's so natural to you, you don't realize it's a gift to corral them
Oh,
or keep them focused.
so that's a great point, and I'm loving this conversation already because I get to reflect back on what's happened over the past 11 years of having my lab. It's
Mhm.
been a lot of trial and error. Right. So a lot of people who are already interested in this are coming from different backgrounds, but I think that neurodiversity is there, not only in terms of, hey, there's this commonality. We care. We want to do research on this. We care about this problem. We want to learn and solve it. But they're also coming from different backgrounds, different drivers. That I think requires a lot of emotional intelligence
Mhm.
and a lot of trial and error. So for me, my experience has been understanding that not everybody's going to be the same, and I don't want one to go again with the term flavor of a lab. Everybody's this no, everybody has to be different. That complements. But it wasn't until I learned from you in particular that every person has a different. While we're all different and we're motivated by similar things, we have our own cards of who we are, our own identities, our own backgrounds that can be then funneled into, say, for example, different colors and how we're defined and different personality traits. So what's funny about the question is that I know people who I didn't want in my lab. They were big contributors. They helped other people. They developed, but I just didn't see eye to eye in many different ways. And I thought, okay, this is not working out. What am I going to do? How do I address this? How do I fix this? And I knew that I needed to kind of customize the way I treated people individually. But you brought an interesting solution to the mix, which was having that diversity of people in the team as a leadership, from a leadership perspective, it's critical. You're getting the right people on the team, and then you put them in the right places. Like Jim Collins, Good to Great, right? You put the right people on the bus, you put them in the right seats. Who drives? Who sits here? Who does that? And that's what you helped me clarify. We did I like to share that experience because it
Sure.
was really telling for me and transformative for the lab. Dianne was a facilitator for one of our retreats, and one of the activities that we did was she asked us all to fill out a questionnaire, and that defined certain traits, certain personality traits, and assigned a color to us. And we had a primary color and a secondary color. And with that information, I was able to put teams together that are working so much better now. So over the past 10 years, there's been an evolution of how leading a team has changed. It's come with experience. It's coming from understanding who is motivated by what are their long-term goals, understanding why are they here now, what is their purpose, and that understanding also that may change. And then ultimately crafting an elegant plan that fits them, that fits the lab, and it becomes a win-win. Does it always work? Nope. But the
No.
idea is to minimize all the problems and learn to adjust and correct course as we go.
So when you need to pivot, when things aren't necessarily working perfectly, and it's dicey a little bit because there's a lot of emotion. You got these passionate people who are all really smart, and we're all human. We all carry our own baggage and our understanding and our worldviews and our autobiographies. There's a lot of things happening. So how do you pivot? What do you do when you need to pivot? Do you take a breath and do something different, or how does that? The how-to part is very curious.
It's the so I think that's threaded in the fabric of the job, I think, which is to have what I call the virtue of quitting, is to know when this needs to stop. And you know this from sailing as much as I do. There comes a point where you realize, oh, that's not going to favor. You got to cut your losses and go, right?
Mhm. Right.
When I'm writing a grant and it's not getting funded, or I have an idea and it's just not going to be popular, I have to know, okay, this topic is not going to work. This experiment is going to be very expensive. I have to make a decision. Do I quit this particular line of work and maybe result in something really amazing, but I can't focus on 10 amazing things. There's a practicality of it. So I remember there was someone who was studying with me in graduate school. I was a postdoc and they were a graduate student, and they could not work on the bench with the precision that was necessary. I mean, they couldn't load a gel to save their lives. It was so bad. And they were trying. And it was a matter of putting this person who's very thoughtful, very meticulous, outside of the bench and put them into a different technique, which was to do animal behavior. And so they would have to observe the mice, their behavior, do whatever mazes, and quantify and do a qualitative analysis first to turn into quantitative analysis. That process of putting one person who was very good out of a position where they were positioned to fail into a position where they could succeed just takes, like you said, a deep breath and obsessively thinking about optimization. How do we do things better? And again, that goes into every part of the job, I think. Like you said, it's also harder when it's people, right?
Right.
And so, uh, say that that's probably one of the hardest things about my career and my job is to think about how to best organize the lab. And I'll say for probably 8 years, I did this on my own, trying to figure it out with a lot of failure. And then you actually helped me out. I know this isn't a plug, but having an outside view was very important. Outside perspective at an intimate level into what the organization is like and what do they need helped me tremendously reorganize. Someone who would have probably left the lab by now is now sitting in a place where they're set to succeed, and the lab benefits from that as well. And we're getting amazing work done, and we're publishing really cool papers together, and we're supporting each other. So all these elements have been very important to have from the neurodiversity perspective.
Yeah, that's really fun. So, how do how do you, manage dealing with all the students that you teach? Like, when you have to go into a class and you see all the neurodiversity, and a lot of people probably also are neurotypical because your lab is, like, in my mind, is a subsection of people who are passionate, they have their advanced degrees or they're working on them, and there's a level of accuracy and dedication, and then students, just the general population of students, even though you're at the University of Florida, which is a very, very good school, there's a wider range of processing and of thinking and of passion and care, even understanding. So,
Right.
what's your best way to manage that? What about a leader who's got people who are both neurotypical and not necessarily very passionate, and then the really passionate people?
Hmm.
How do you balance that in a room?
Right. It's hard because it's a broad audience, right? And so I have been fortunate to essentially have these uh, media visibility, and people may approach me in an email or reach out at a conference or what have you. There's already a layer of filtering that comes across and say, oh, say 10 undergraduate students from the University of Florida, which are fantastic. And they're coming from different, like you said, neurotypical, neurodiverse, and they can see the video and say, okay, well, maybe I'm interested, maybe I'm not, but some will self-select and say, I'm definitely interested. And that's why I get a group of students who are more interested because they're more passionate. They're actually making that leap to get there. In classes, I think maybe I'm selecting because I use Socratic method quite heavily, and I'm very animated in my talks and my hands start moving and excitement. I think a lot of students get scared by that, but others love it. Um, I remember a student telling me once that because they met that I don't like uncomfortable silences. And so
Okay.
in class, something that will typically happen is I'll say, okay, Diane, what is the main form of dementia? And then you'll think about it. And I see that you're shy. So, well, you're not, but say this student would be shy. And then I'd say it starts with an A, ends in Alzheimer's disease. And then it kind of hopefully breaks the ice and people start becoming more and more comfortable. But some students don't like that. They don't like it at all. And so I think maybe my role is not to open a message for everyone, for all, rather to open, hey, this is who I am. This is what my lab stands for. This is the work that we do. If you're interested, reach out, we can talk. And once they're here, the whole group having the strong foundation that it has, the neurodiversity that we have, can now help shape that student into the next amazing thing that they're going to do in their career.
Right, so, like, your self-sorting process, and I think that's really important, is you're just you. You're
Yes.
animated, really fun, extremely intelligent, great mentor, teacher, just shows up. And then whoever's attracted to it, like the law of attraction, right? In a lot of ways, whoever's attracted to it self-selects.
Right.
And then whoever's not attracted to it, you don't go chasing those people down the hall, dragging them to your lab to work with you. You like still support them and do whatever they need, from you. And they don't belong in the lab necessarily. And so I think that that's a really effective way to sort for things, because a lot of times people, who are mentors, I see it all the time, try to be a certain thing. Like, oh, you need this, oh, you need that. So I'm just going to keep being pliable. Well, that doesn't always add for really good selection of people and who you're going to attract. Like if you were going to try to be reserved and not move your hands when you talk teaching, which would be impossible. But if you were going to try that,
Right.
I don't know that it would work.
Right.
It would be a real mixed bag.
And that
So,
lack of authenticity would hurt at the end, right?
right. It would be very painful for all involved,
Yeah.
because we want that authenticity and that realness, right?
Mhm.
So you have a very demanding job and you have a big family. So what do you do to take care of you?
I this is taking care of me. I love my office. I love where I am. I love doing what I do. And I love being a dad. I love doing sports and working out. And so what I do for me is find those avenues of joy in every part of my life in a way that it's overlapping with all the other duties that may not be as pleasant. For example, I get to talk to you today and I get to talk to you about work. These two things fill me up. And this is interspersed between doing administrative work that I wasn't really excited about, but had to be done today. Right. And so then there's a little bit of joy in everything that I do, or maybe a lot of joy in everything that I do.
Right.
I'm I get tonight, for example, I teach from 3 to 4, and at 4 I'm done. And then I have to go home, rush, get the kids, take them to soccer. But while they're doing soccer practice, I'm also playing soccer myself. And so then I get my mental health, my workout, my exercise, camaraderie with all the guys. So I have a little bit of everything everywhere. And because I have these hard stops, it's something that is setting a boundary that is healthy.
Mm,
And that
yes.
which I've learned has given me a lot of balance. Also learned that from you, has
Mm,
given me a lot of balance. And without that balance, without having all the kids, my wife, the extracurricular activities, then work and time for me, without that balance, it doesn't work.
right. And
Somehow,
those healthy boundaries and that balance makes it so it's possible for all of this to work together.
that's right.
Right.
So,
And I love the way you said, I love being a dad. So
yeah.
talk a little bit about all your children are gifted and they all are neurodiverse in their own cool ways. And so how do you uniquely connect with each one of them as their dad to foster their development?
It's so hard because there's no manual.
There's no manual.
They're all different
Mhm.
because they're multi-potentialites. They are very high level, very high functioning, and whatever they're going to be spectacular, best in the world at right now, they'll be spectacular, best in the world, and tomorrow some completely different. So I'm trying to keep tabs on all aspects. And I have 5 kids, as you know, 5 kids. They're all in different stages. My oldest is 11, my youngest is 9 months old, and they're going through different parts. So for example, I know that Gabby, and I hope she doesn't watch this, I know that one of her favorite books, one of her favorite things to do is to read. And I know that she likes a series called Wings of Fire. So I have secretly downloaded Wings of Fire books, and I'm going to listen to them so that one day I'll just start talking about Wings of Fire, and that way we build that connection.
No, that's
And
great.
she's going to love it. She's been trying to push those books on everybody else. I know that Miguel is he loves Legos, and so he'll show some interest in something, and I try to do it. I try to be there for everything. I try to build everything, and just try to keep tabs. One thing that we discovered lately that's been really important is having the chance to spend one-on-one time with them individually,
Mhm.
or more than just a little thing. So, for example, if Miguel gets a good grade on his test, or Alejandro gets a good grade on his test, I'm going to take him tomorrow night, for example. I'm going to take him to a restaurant where we're going to eat his favorite food, just the two of us for about 30 minutes, and then come home. And that's, I hope, going to build core memories for them. And it's something special for me to have special individual time one on one,
Right.
and that sort of thing. So it's hard. I'm figuring it out as I go. And I'll report back as things get I get to know what works or not. But I'll guarantee this: whatever works for Gabriela is not going to work for Sebastian. They're all going to be so different.
That's correct. There is no there's no manual, and they're all very different. And so therein lies a challenge, but it's a similar thing with all the people in your lab, right?
Correct.
They're they're not your kids, obviously, but they kind of are because they're underneath you. You're their protector in that sense, right? And so they are very different, and they all have unique, different needs. And so I think when we pay attention to that, like you mentioned earlier, emotional intelligence, that paying attention on that level is extremely valuable. And a lot of people think it's all about your head. Like you do neuroscience research, you're like really smart. And most people would think that it all comes from your head. But what you're saying is it comes from your heart and your head helps out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So now where's your intuition in all this?
That's exactly it. Intuition, I think, is that emotional intelligence. So, for example, I can tell from body language who's on and who's off. I can tell you if the person who's presenting in my lab meeting tomorrow is not feeling well. I can tell before they walk in the room by their affect, by their tone of voice, by how they're moving in the room. I can tell. So then, at that moment in time, I know that I have to readjust. And that adjustment has to be on the fly. I have to readjust to know that, okay, today's not going to be the day that in front of the lab, we're going to dig deep into the work that they're doing. They're going to present their work. I need them to walk out on a win. And I need to know that when that means for them today is that they probably put a lot of work in their presentation. I want them to go through all the slides, present their work. I'm going to save all the questions to the end. And then we'll have a one-on-one away from everybody else to both debrief on the science at a deeper level, and also maybe on a personal level. Are you okay? Just a check-in. Make sure, and that happens quite frequently, right?
Mhm,
I'll tell you, and it's adjusting to that, just to expand upon that and some of the examples of flexibility and pivoting in the moment.
mhm,
Recently, we had a retreat, as you know, and I had part of the retreat was to have uninterrupted time for me to meet with the senior people in my lab. One of the research assistant professors in my lab on day one was going to work with me on a particular grant. And we were going to work together for 3 hours uninterrupted. For the first 15, 20 minutes, we started talking about the grant. What were the deadlines? What were the format? What was the formatting of the paper? How was everything going to work out? By the end of the next 20 minutes, I realized that what the time that they had with me was not time for the grant. It was something else that he was asking for. And I'll tell you that because I realized that they were asking more about family in the United States. And it was an interesting evolution of that conversation from what are the formats to when do I write it to about my house to about the work and my commute and how my commute went. And I met and all these things. And I realized, wait a minute, we're not talking about this grant anymore. And I had to stop, change my expectation, and realize they don't want to talk about this. They want to talk about something different. It is not only valuable, it is far more important for this person and I to connect right now and leave the grant behind. We can talk about the grant through emails
Right.
or later in the day. So what did we do? An hour in, hour and a half in, we were looking at Google Maps of his hometown, how long it takes for him and his family to fly to somewhere else, where it was more of a personal connection. That's the kind of thing that's invaluable that I would never get to do in the lab because not only do we not have the time, but it's in a different context. And that is amazing to be able to pick up on those cues and act on them. And I look back, man, I wonder if I've missed some of these in the past. I'm sure I have. And how can I adjust for that to not miss them again? Because the connections and the bonds are so strong right now in the lab that it's extremely productive and fun.
And therein lies the value of being the mentor that you are, which is why I asked you on the show, because you care on that level, you're paying attention, and you're always growing yourself. I think a lot of people think, okay, I've mastered this and I'm done. And that's not true. The world's always expanding. We're always growing, all of us. And so that your ability to keep growing and learning how to pivot and do it and caring authentically about your people makes you a great mentor.
Oh, thank you. I'll tell you, I started from the opposite. Because when I started, I was like, oh, hiring people, please, I got this. I'm a people person. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to hire the best. Fail, fail, fail. And it's been because it's not natural to, I can be friends with people, but that's not my job. My job is to be a mentor. And I didn't know what that meant. I know what a mentor is. I had mentors in the past, but I'm me and I have to find my own way of mentoring and what we talked about authenticity.
Right.
Yes, of course, there's a component where I need to be able to learn the rules to engage with a certain person in the best way possible for
Right.
it to be an optimal interaction.
Mhm.
But I also have to be me. So
Right.
isn't that funny? Isn't that a funny formula that's constantly moving? It's consistency and it's fluid. It's so fluid
Mhm. Oh,
that
yeah.
it's hard to define, encapsulate. But in that fluidity, understanding that that fluidity is there, I agree with you, is how we can improve upon the whole process at all.
Yeah, and then everybody rises up. Because I imagine you spending that time with that person helped elevate them in a way that you're still seeing the positive impact of that one discussion now months later.
I think so.
I imagine that that's probably the case.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the interest of time, I only have a couple more questions because I'm watching the clock because I could talk to you about this stuff forever. We might have to do another show. I just might have to corral you for another one. But
Always happy.
you've traveled all over the world and you've had all these great experiences. And so I'm really curious about what the most memorable food is that you've ever eaten. And you love food. Food's your love language. So, and oh, by the way, y'all, Joe makes the best brisket ever. I had to go to the university for a board meeting, and um, Joe made me brisket, and I'm still thinking about it quite some time later. So, what's the most memorable food you've ever eaten?
At a conference, we went to Vienna, and it was my first conference in Europe. Um, and that's so many. This is a great question because you're evoking memories of how everything. And what's funny is it connects to everything of where I am today. That's a great question. So I'll answer like this very briefly. It is Sri Lankan food in the middle of Vienna. That was the best food. And I'll tell you why it was so good. It was the experience. That's the first time I met Dr. Jada Lewis, who's a few offices down,
Mm.
who ultimately facilitated my recruitment to the University of Florida in 2018. This conference was in 2009. That's when we met. And we had to hunt that restaurant down. We finally found it. And it's still a conversation today about going to Sri Lankan restaurants all over the world. Great
I
question.
love that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Okay, and your final question
Mhm.
of the show is, if we were going to put a billboard up that the entire world was going to see with your message, what is your message for the world that you would like the whole world to see?
How much time do I have to think about it?
as long as you need.
This is trite, but it's so true. And walking the walk and learning it, it's learning to trust myself is probably the biggest thing that's helped me. The biggest lesson I've had to learn, to trust myself and to love myself and to recognize my self-worth. If I don't have that confidence, I can't move throughout and accomplish things
Mhm.
appropriately. And that hits into integrity, doing the right thing, no matter the pressure, into seeking truth. What is that truth that we're looking for and how to do it properly
Mhm.
and doing it well, doing good and doing well, both things. And all that comes from that understanding ourselves and loving ourselves with all our strengths and all our weaknesses.
There you go. Know yourself and love yourself, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it breeds all the rest. That is totally beautiful. So I want to thank you for your time. And I want to know if there's anything that you wanted to share that I didn't ask you about that was on your heart so that when we finish, you feel done.
Well, it's gratitude more than anything, not just for the opportunity to be here, because you may not notice, but even working through this conversation, I'm not working through it, having the conversation, I'm working through things in my head. And it's funny, you've brought back memories from over a decade. So just having this wonderful opportunity to sit here and talk to you for the last 20, 30 minutes has been amazing for me. What an experience.
Oh,
So
well,
thank you.
you're welcome. Well, I thank you so much for being here with us. And I know you guys absolutely loved this show like I did. I'm going to listen to it again, even though I just did it with Joe. And so you will be able to find links in the show notes and a bio about Joe, and you'll find more information in the show notes. And if you want to contact me for any further information, my link is in the show notes as well. So in the meantime, everybody, put your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you because you are a rock star. You're here on purpose with a purpose. So don't forget to know yourself and love yourself, just as Dr. Joe says. Talk to you later. And in the next episode of Someone Gets Me, be well.